Hey, this is Chef Two Dogz. I really can't tell you how I got that name. I think the government would get upset about that. But anyway, I prepared a dish for you today, and I hope you enjoy it. And I think it's about ready. So I think I hear the timer going off now. Let me turn around and get it. There it is. This is my fiery squash, and it's not your grandma's squash casserole either, so be careful about this, but I really think you'll enjoy it. And if you want to hang on, I'll tell you how to make it. Hi, I'm back to show you the ingredients for the fiery squash. You're going to love it. First, we need 5 jalapeno peppers, 1/2 onion, don't want to overdo the onion, 1/2 is fine, 1 red and 1 yellow bell pepper, 6 medium squash, 2 eggs, some stick butter. You'll only need 1/4 of a stick. I'll show you that later. And most importantly, 16 ounces of mild cheddar cheese. And by all means, if there's only one thing I ask is do not, please do not use low-fat or non-fat cheese. Then we need a medium-sized bag of chips of your choice, but I like kettle cooked, can be jalapeno flavor. Then we'll need some Worcestershire sauce, some fresh ground black pepper, a little garlic sauce. I like to use some Old Bay, and also some Italian seasoning of your choice. Of course, I'll show you how much of that to use in the next segment. And then you will need some Pam olive oil spray. Hi, now we're going to talk about the kitchen utensils that you will need to prepare this dish. You need a multi-purpose cheese grater, small bowl to mix your spices in, a whisk, of course to whisk the eggs, a normal size utility knife or slicer, whatever, small saute pan, medium-sized pan to boil the squash, colander to drain the squash, and probably most importantly, a large mixing bowl with a spoon. This is one of the key things to preparing this particular dish, which I will emphasize later. And then, of course, you'll have 2 casserole dishes, and the recipe that I'm giving you generally makes 1 large casserole dish and 1 small, because you're definitely going to need 1 for your friends. We'll move on to the next segment and get started. Hi, now let's get started. First, we're going to chop the onion. Now that we've finished chopping the onion, we will reach over and get our saute pan and place the onions into the pan. Then we will be ready for the next step, which will be to chop our jalapeno peppers. Now that we've chopped our jalapenos, we'll place them in the saute bowl. and move on to the next step, which will be to chop our bell peppers. Now that we've chopped the peppers, we'll place them into the saute pan. And we had some large peppers today, so if you have a little bit larger saute pan, that would be perfectly fine. We were fortunate to have some really nice peppers. Now we'll move on to the next step, which will be to slice and quarter the squash. Alright, now that the squash is chopped and quartered, we're going to place it into the medium boiling pan and we're going to set it aside for just a few minutes, because one of the keys to this recipe, or this procedure as I call it, is having everything come together at the correct time, which means having the squash boiled and hot before you put it in the colander to drain it, and having the saute also hot, and I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. So we'll set the squash aside for right now, and our next step will be to go ahead and grate the cheese. Now, let me say, this looks like a lot of cheese, but it's not, trust me. Now, our next step is going to be to go ahead and crush the chips up into the mixing bowl with the cheese. Now, this is the fun part. Just take your chips, as I have showed you before. Release the air out of the bag. Rush them up. Rush them up. Pour them on top of the cheese. Oh, spread them out real good, just like so. And now you have your mixing bowl ready. Now that we've finished preparing the cheese and the chips, we're going to set that aside. And we're going to begin prepping the squash for the stove. It needs to be boiled 10 minutes. So I'm going to start by covering the squash with water. Then we'll set it aside for a moment, and we will prepare our saute also for the stove, because as I may have said before, it's very important that both these processes get hot and on the stove at the same time, and I'll point that out later as to why that's very important. So now let's start with our saute mix. First, we're going to take our Worcestershire sauce and put 1/4 cup into the saute bowl, which has the bell peppers, jalapeno peppers, and onion. Then we're going to cut two tablespoons of stick butter, and slice the butter on top of the saute. so. Now that we've prepared the squash and the saute, we're going to go ahead and place them on the stove. The squash needs to be started off at medium heat and brought to a boil, and once it comes to a medium boil, boil for 10 minutes. The saute will begin to warm up on a low heat, and you may wish to stir that as it goes along to mix the butter and the Worcestershire sauce. And our next step will be to prepare the spices, which is added to the saute. Okay, we're just about ready for our fiery squash. Now we're going to mix the spices. I like to use a teaspoon of garlic salt, a teaspoon of Old Bay sauce, and a teaspoon of your favorite Italian spice. And then some fresh ground black pepper. I don't try to measure it, just grate some out to your taste. Okay, now we're going to put the combination of spices into the saute mix, which is on the stove. By mixing the saute toward the end of the, by mixing the spices toward the end of the saute, it allows the spices to infuse into the saute. All spices go into the saute, which is just about ready for the main step of combining all the ingredients. Here's what you can do right now, because while you're waiting for the spices to infuse, you can go ahead and break a couple of eggs. Hey, that happens. Okay, we're going to go ahead and lightly whisk 2 eggs. So that they will be ready for our final combination of ingredients. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take the squash off the stove and drain it in the colander. Then we'll go ahead and take the saute off the stove and be prepared for the mixture. But the squash needs to drain for just 2 or 3 minutes. And this is one of the keys to this particular dish, is all the ingredients that are hot, the squash and the saute, which were on the stove, to come in combination at one time. So when we start the mixing process, the cheese will be thoroughly melted. And this is a very, very key to this particular process that we're doing now. So I am ready to go ahead and start that mixing process. Dump the squash in the large mixing bowl with the cheese and the chips. Go ahead and pour your whisked eggs in on top. Then take your saute mix, which has all the spices well infused, put it on top. And then the mixing process begins. I like to use a wooden spoon, no particular reason, maybe what I'm used to. And you do not need to get in a hurry on this because you just mix it around the perimeter of the bowl toward the center. And it takes just a very few minutes, but the mixture needs to be well combined. Oh, it smells so good. Okay, once the mixture is well combined, all the cheese is melted, we are ready to pour it into our casserole dishes. Take some Pam or any type of vegetable oil, lightly coat your casserole dishes. As I said before, my ingredients, the ingredients I've given you will fill about one large and one small casserole dish. So you start spooning the ingredients into the casserole dish, just spreading it out as you go. One thing to be sure of is I try not to have the casserole to be too thick. About an inch, inch and a half thickness is about right. You spread it out thoroughly, patting down with your wooden spoon, like so. And now, it's ready to go into the oven on 350 degrees for about 40 minutes. Check it about 30 or 35 minutes, and when it starts bubbling on the side, you will have a dish that no one can refuse. Promise. Hey, this is Two Dogz, and I thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy this dish, the fiery squash. And stay tuned, there might be more to come. See you later. Two Dogz.